What is up, guys? My name is Ben Hartwell. Thanks for checking out the channel. Please consider smashing that subscribe button. It really does help out the channel. So if you've been following me for any amount of time, you'll have probably seen a whole load of videos on me banging on about Helix. I've been a really long time Helix user. I think I got my first one in 2015, just as it came out, as I had a bunch of fly gigs coming up. I needed something fairly compact that I could travel with. Since then, I've used it on nearly every single gig I've done. And when I haven't been using the actual Helix unit here in the studio, I've been using Helix Native for nearly every video I've ever made. So last week when Line6 announced that Stadium Native was coming out, you know I had to give it a try. So what is actually new in Stadium Native compared to the old Helix Native? Well, according to the Line6 website, they're using the new Agora amp modeling technology that has been in the Stadium hardware. That's now in Stadium Native. I think there are around 30 Agora amp models, so we'll check those out. There are 132 total amp models and 152 amplifier channels now in Helix Stadium Native, 260 plus effects, 60 speaker cabinet models with the new focus view so you can actually move the microphone around in 3D space, seamless integration with the Stadium hardware, cabinet IR, proxy clone loading, the new height control, which you definitely need to try out, focus view, which looks really cool, where you can morph between various different sounds that have been set by Line6 on every single piece of gear, preset info and clips, and then there's a few other bits and pieces which seem like they've been carried over from Helix Native. So let's jump into the software and check it out. So this is Helix Stadium Native, and from the outset, it looks pretty much identical to Helix Native. One really cool thing you can see at the top of the software here is that I'm actually in the trial of Helix Stadium Native. That's because Line6 are offering a full 15-day free trial of Helix Stadium Native, which I think is a really cool thing that they're actually doing to let people try the software before you actually buy it. Another really cool thing that Line6 are doing that I don't actually think they did with the release of Helix Native, but they are doing with Stadium Native, is they're doing an intro version which gives you 5 amps, 5 cabs, and a bunch of other effects and stuff. And it's completely free. So if you've never used Helix Native and you want to check it out and see what it's all about, you can actually get a completely free version now, as well as the 15-day free trial of the full version. Okay, so what is there to show you in Helix Stadium Native that's actually new and different from the old Helix Native? Well, one of the big quality of life improvements for me has been the fact that instead of just having the slider view now, which we kind of got used to with the old Helix hardware and the old version of Native, but now we have a much better view. Let me show you. So if I just grab an amp, I'll just grab the top one, and I come down here now, I can now switch all of these slider views into a knob view. Although that doesn't really seem like a big deal, I think this is great. Having grown up playing tube amps and effects pedals that had physical knobs on them, this view makes so much more sense to me, and when I look at it at a glance, I can tell exactly where things are set, compared to the old view of sliders, which I found a little bit more tricky to view really quickly. It's still not perfect. For example, if I grab the Solid 100, which is the new Agora model of the SLO 100, you can see here that there's a knob to turn the bright switch on the normal channel, and it's still an actual knob. I would much prefer that graphic to be an actual switch. That would make a lot more sense to me, just like it is in the slider view here, where it's an actual toggle switch. A small thing, but I think that would be better. The next huge update that they've added is focus view. So when you're in any piece of gear, there's now this little iris tool at the top here. If you click on that, it puts it into focus view. Let's make this a bit bigger so we can see what we're doing. And in focus view, you get a picture of whatever the piece of gear is at the time. So if I just come back out of this and I just add a distortion pedal, so now if I click on focus view here, we get the focus view of the Teamer. If I click on focus view on the amp, we get the focus view of the amp. And initially when I saw Line6 demoing this, I thought it was probably going to be a bit gimmicky, but it actually turns out to be a really useful feature. So they've set up 5 different sounds in the corners and the center of this image of each of the individual pieces of gear. And as you move this circle around into the various different areas on that graphic, you can see all the sliders changing at the bottom. If we change this back to the knobs, you'll see all the knobs move as we move the circle around in the image. So it's changing a whole load of the parameters in that piece of gear just by moving that circle around. And it's changing things that I think as users of Helix Native a lot of the time we wouldn't really be changing things like the sag and the ripple and these new controls at the bottom. And it does exactly the same with the other pieces of gear. So if I go back to the teamer and I go into focus view and I drag that around, you can see all the knobs changing their positions. At the moment, all you can do is move between the presets that Line6 have assigned to each of those corners. I do believe in one of the updates that's coming, you're going to be able to set your own presets in those corners and then blend between the various ones that you assign yourself. That'll be really cool. So you can kind of think of it as presets of the individual pieces of gear. So the teamer set a certain way, and then you can blend between each of those presets to find the perfect sound. It's actually a really cool feature. Two more really cool things with focus view. When you click on an amp and go into focus view, it now actually tells you what that amp is based off. So here I have the US Tweedman, and you can see here that it says based on a Fender Bassman. That's really cool because with some of the gear in Helix, you can kind of tell what it's based on, but some of it you're not really too sure. So now it actually tells you, and I think it works across the entire range of amps, pedals, and everything. If we just click through a few, you can see that text updating each time I click onto a new amp, and you can see it does exactly the same with the pedals too. Really cool. Another awesome feature that I only found the other day was that if you use focus view on one of the parametric EQs, you get the same view that you get on the Helix Stadium hardware, which means that you get all these bands that you can move around to shape your tone. Amazing. Where it gets super interesting is when you get into the focus view on a cab. So finally, we now have in Helix Stadium Native a 3D graphic of the mic and cab that we can move around in 3D space. This is something that's been needed for a long time. I know a lot of other software has already had this for quite a long time. Things like the Nora DSP plugins, Amplitude, and the 2-Note stuff have all had this kind of implementation where you can grab hold of the mic and move it around on the speaker. And now we finally have it in Stadium Native. You can change between your various microphones and they all get a really nice graphical representation. You can click and drag and move that microphone around on the cone. You can do things like change the angle, and then there's all the other old parameters that we had in Helix Native. A much needed update. One thing that I would like to see implemented is I would like the settings to stay when I change the various cabinets. For example, if I knew that I wanted this 57 on an angle at this distance, but I just wanted to try a few different cabinets, I would like an option where I can tell it that I don't want the microphone to change each time I change a cabinet. The way it works at the moment is if I change a cabinet, the microphone changes. Not that big a deal really, it'd be fairly straightforward just to choose that microphone again. And I guess that Line6 have kind of chosen what they consider to be the best sounding microphone and setup for that cab. I just think it'd be a really cool option. Okay, so what about these new Agora amps then? One of the biggest things that they've done with these new amp models is that we now have individual channels on that amp. So we don't have to load up a bunch of different amp models now like we used to do, for example with the placator, where if you wanted to have both channels of the placator, you would have to have those two different amplifiers loaded up and then switch between them. We can now just switch between the channel on the amp, although the placator doesn't have an Agora amp model yet, but the SLO does. So you can see now that this first control that we have actually switches between the two channels on the SLO, and the second control is actually switching between the modes on that first channel. We did see something similar implemented on some of the old models. I'm still thinking of like on the placator, where you could switch between the BE and the HBE, but I think this implementation is now much better. Another cool thing about these amp models is that we now only seem to have the controls that actually exist on the real amp. So for example, this US 5-watt Tweed only has drive and master. So it looks like if an amp doesn't have a tone stack in the real world, we're not going to get it in Stadium Native. And I actually really like that. The next cool feature that they've added in these Agora amp models is this hyper control. And as I understand it, it adjusts the amp model, taking it from the raw kind of accurate sounding model to a more produced sound. Let me show you what it does. Okay, so I've got a really simple patch set up. I've just got one of the new Agora amps. This is the US Princess 76. I haven't changed any of the settings. This is exactly as the amp loads up when you select it. And this is also the cab that it populates when you select that amp. And the only other thing that I've added is some plate reverb. So as you can see, the hype knob is at 0. So this is how the amp sounds at the moment. So if I now put the hype knob all the way up, this is the tone we get. So I think at 10, that is probably way over the top. It has a much fuller sound. It's very compressed, but it's really cool that we've got this extra feature where we can dial in a slightly different tone in the amp, and maybe somewhere around 2 or 3 might be exactly the tone that you're looking for. Let's try it with one of the other amps. So I've just loaded up the Agora Brit Jubilee, which is a model of a Marshall Jubilee. I haven't changed any of the settings. It's automatically loaded the 412 Brit V30 cab for me. And the height knob is currently at 0. So this is the tone we have. So now if I increase that hype knob, again, that's changing the tone quite drastically. It seems to be bumping up a lot of those low mids, feeling a little bit more compressed, maybe a touch more gain. So there's probably quite a lot of things happening behind the scenes there. But I guess this is just going to be one of those controls that you just mess around with and see if it's something that you want to introduce when you're designing your tones. Really cool feature though. One of the big new selling points of the new Helix hardware is the ability to use proxies, which is Line 6 clones or captures of gear. And that is now in Helix Stadium Native as well. So to get to Proxy, you use the new tabs that they've added, which subdivide the categories of the various gear. So we're in amp here. So the first one is guitar amp. We then have bass amp. We have the legacy guitar amps, the legacy bass amps, and then Proxy. And it works kind of the same way as a lot of the other capture technology. So you can either have just an amp or you can have an amp and cab capture. So here I've just selected amp clone, which will just be a proxy clone of an amplifier head. So I'll still need a speaker cabinet. And then you would just click here where it says empty. And if you had any of the proxy clones, you could just load them straight in. I don't have any proxies yet. And as I don't have my Helix Stadium yet, I can't even make any to try it out. It works exactly the same way for gain pedals as well. So in the new subcategories along the top, we have mono pedals, stereo pedals, legacy pedals, and then proxies along the top. So you could click this, and then if you had any proxies of any gain pedals, you could load those up as well. Really cool. I don't yet know how it sounds, but I'm going to do a full video on Proxy so that I can find out all about it. Another cool feature is the amount of blocks that we can actually load in the software has gone from 32 blocks with the old Helix Native all the way up to 48 blocks with Helix Stadium Native. So that now means we can design some really complicated rigs with multiple signal paths, mono, stereo, all those kind of things, and not have to worry about how many blocks we're able to use. And speaking of complex signal paths, check this out. We can now have more than one split per path. This is so useful. In the old Helix Native, you could only have one path split. Even if you did it as a small split like one of these, you could still only have one per path. Now we can have multiple paths. I don't actually know how many we can have. Let's try it out. Okay, so it looks like we can have 6 splits per path, if that's something that you really wanted to do. I imagine that doing splits like this means that the DSP will take a hit. So if you were to do splits like this, you might have to be a bit conscious about what amps and effects you were to use, but super cool that we can now do this. Another super cool thing that they've added in Stadium Native is the fact that a lot of pedals now have a sidechain. That means that you could route audio from another channel in your DAW to trigger the sidechain of Helix Stadium Native. That means you could do things like ducking delays, or like here, you could have it activate this compressor. It means that you could create some really interesting effects within your DAW. One thing that is worth noting is that Helix Stadium Native doesn't actually take over from Helix Native. They both exist as separate plugins. So if you've been using Helix Native in your sessions, that will still work when you load those sessions up. Stadium Native won't take over from Helix Native in those sessions, but you should be able to import all of the sounds that you made in Helix Native into Stadium Native if you want to. Okay, so the biggest question I think everyone is asking about the new Stadium Native and Stadium itself is, do the Agora models actually sound any different? Well, from the bit of testing that I've been doing, yeah, I think they actually do, and they seem to feel different too. Let me load up one of the tests I've been doing and I'll show you what I mean. So I've just got a really super simple setup here of a single amp and a single cab, both in Helix Stadium Native and in the original Helix Native. And all I'm going to do is load up one of the new Agora amps in Stadium Native, and it will load up its corresponding cab. Then I'm just going to load up the old equivalent amp in Helix Native and the same cab, and just A/B between the two. The only other thing that's in the patch is a bit of reverb. I've made sure that it's the same between Helix Stadium Native and Helix Native, and that's not going to change between each of the different sounds. I'm just going to change the amp and the cab. This test is in no way scientific, but hopefully it'll let us see what the difference in the sound is and the feel between the new Agora amps in Stadium Native and the old amps in Helix Native. Here we go. A couple of little quality of life improvements that they've added: whenever you choose an amp, it automatically loads the corresponding cab with it now. I think this is a really cool feature because a lot of the time you might be trying to design a tone and not know yet what amp it is that you're going to settle on, and then when you do settle on an amp you might not know what cab goes with that. Well, now it automatically loads with it. So here you can see I've got the Tweedman amp and it's automatically loaded the 4x10 Tweed cab. If I now switch that amp and go for something different like the Matchstick, it's going to load the 2x12 match cab that goes along with that amp. Really cool feature. Another really useful thing that they've added is a contextual help box that pops up with every single control if you're not entirely sure what each one does. So for example, if you didn't know what SAG did here, you can double click it and it brings up this box that tells you exactly what that control does. And it seems to work across every single control in Helix Stadium Native. So for example, here's channel 2 tone, here's the bass, here's the channel switch. If you go into the cab, here's what the low cut does, here's what the position does. Let's try it with a few pedals. So here's what the sidechain does in this red squeeze, here's what the sensitivity does. We go into this teamer, here's what the bass cut does. Here's what the clipping does. Really useful because a lot of the time there will be controls and you don't really know what they do. Well, now you just double click it and it tells you exactly what that control does. Really useful. So that is a quick rundown of a bunch of the new features in Helix Stadium Native. And I actually think it's pretty good. The biggest takeaway that I've had from it is that they seem to really streamline the procedure of actually making the tones. With focus view and the new hype control, I think they're kind of making it easier than it was in Helix Native to get those tones dialed in and get them where you actually want them. I think the new Agora amps are really cool, and now that we've got channel switching on those amps, I think is a big plus. I don't think they sound that much different than the original amps, but they do seem to have a bit of a different feel, so that's cool. I think as an overall, it's actually a pretty cool update, and I think if you are already a Helix Native user or you have original Helix hardware or any of the new Stadium hardware, you get Stadium Native at a discounted price. You just have to log into your Line6 account and check the pricing. And I think the really cool thing that they've done this time is allow you to have that free version so you can test out the software and see if it's something that you want to get. You can even test out the full version of software like I've been doing with the 15-day free trial. And then if you decide that you don't need everything that Stadium Native has, you just want a few amp models, you can get that intro version for completely free. So there you go guys, that's a quick rundown of Helix Stadium Native. It's actually really cool. Get onto the Line6 website, download the free version and check it out. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up below. If you want to watch another video on my channel, you can do it just there. And don't forget to subscribe. You can do it right there. I'll see you in the next one.